Alright, what's up everybody? Welcome back to another video on the Southern Ground Hunting channel. Today I am going to start something that I'm going to do throughout the summer 2021, and I'm going to actually be recapping a lot of the hunts that I did back in 2020. We're going to start there. We may even go a little bit further back, but I want to take each individual hunt, successful hunts where I killed a buck, and talk about just kind of break down the area and break down what happened, where the deer came from, why I was set up in that area, just things like that that maybe I couldn't cover completely in the video itself. So if you've seen these videos, it may give you a little bit better background. If you haven't, you can go watch those. They're all on the deer hunting playlist. And I'm actually going to start out with my first buck of 2020. I shot this deer on private land. I hadn't shot a bunch of deer on private land in a long time, especially bucks. I've shot a couple does and stuff like that, but as far as bucks are concerned, I haven't shot a buck on private land at this point in quite a few years. And one thing that I've talked about a lot on the podcast and on different videos and stuff like that is I would like to go onto a hunting club. I hadn't hunted a hunting club in a while. And I would like to go on a hunting club and see if the things that I've learned hunting on public land would transfer to some of the private land areas, especially hunting clubs. Now, if you're not familiar with a hunting club, they are, in a lot of ways, they see more pressure than a lot of the public land that I hunt. You got a lot of people who lease, they go in on a lease together, and you have a bunch of members that are all typically hunting the same areas, shooting houses, green fields, feeders, and things like that. Not something that I'm super interested in. Not to say that I won't do it and that I won't do it at some point in the future. But just for the time being, I'm not really super interested in that. So I actually went into this place. My friend Aaron invited me to go in, and I went into it and decided for one of the afternoons that I was not going to go to a designated spot. I was actually going to go into a spot that I hadn't seen before. We scouted it, and I think we scouted it somewhere around 11 o'clock or so that morning. After we hunted the morning hunt, we went and I scouted it and found a lot of good sign, a lot of good information that led me to think that I had a pretty good chance of shooting a buck right here. So what I did was we went into this, and I didn't take a camera, so I didn't have any footage of the scouting portion of this hunt. But what we found was on this map, I'll try to show you as well as I can, is this SMZ strip coming into probably a 3-ish year old clear cut. Anytime I go into an area that has a clear cut or has pines, like short pines like this, the SMZs are very attractive to me for a couple of reasons. Number one, I see deer using these SMZs as an entry and exit from these big, thick, big, huge pieces of property that are all cut and just have pines planted in there. They're usually those pines are super thick, and in a lot of ways they're impenetrable, even for a deer in some of them, in some cases. So that's why I'm always looking at these SMZs. It's just a stream management zone. It's a strip of hardwoods that they've left around a creek, and they seem to attract a lot of deer on either side of that SMZ strip. They have the cover of those pines on both sides of it. The other thing is food and water. So those stream management zones are all around a creek, and so they've got water there. They've also got oaks in those SMZs, but if they want acorns, if they want anything like that, they've got to get into the hardwoods. And so those SMZs always tend to be a good travel zone for all deer. But in this case, when we went to it and checked it out, the way it worked, you had this SMZ coming out of the main block of woods, which was a mixture of hardwoods and pines, and pretty tall pines. Now, one of the things that I noticed immediately when I got to this SMZ was trails. There was a ton of trails crossing and tracks crossing the fire break trail that we walked in. There was a lot of tracks right there around that SMZ. And if I kind of go back in this video just a little bit, when I'm walking in to this area, you can kind of see how that transition line really works. I'm walking down this fire break trail, and that's when I started seeing those tracks. And then once I got down to, like, it wasn't a real steep bottom, but that there's a little bit of terrain going downhill into that creek where the SMZ first comes out of the woods, and I noticed a rub right there that was pretty fresh. Now, when we hunted this place, it was around mid-October, probably. I think it was like the 20th, somewhere around there. And where I hunt in Alabama typically, and this area specifically, the rut's not usually until January. So when you start seeing rubs, when you start finding rubs and buck sign in that far in advance from the rut, that's something that I usually like to key in on. Now, if I'm, getting really close to the rut and I start seeing a bunch of rubs and scrapes, especially if it's during that rut time, I mean, I'll put some value on that, but not just a ton. Most of the time when I'm hunting big sign, it's going to be early season, and the reason why is because that's when you can really find a buck's core area. When we first walk down there, I see these rubs, and then I start seeing a bunch of rubs, and then I start seeing where it looked like deer had been kind of pawing at the ground, getting acorns out from underneath the leaves, things like that. You could tell it was just a really heavy feeding area. So knowing what I knew about buck bedding, let's look at the map for just a second. Knowing what I knew about buck bedding, I figured that this deer, on the wind that we had, so the wind was basically coming out of the north. There was a cold front coming through that afternoon. The wind was coming out of the north. So in a wind-based buck bedding scenario, that buck is going to bed usually around the top and with the wind at his back looking down. And so it would be a south-facing slope. I started looking at my map, looking at that clear-cut area where I figured this buck was going to be bedded at, and it really looked pretty perfect, to be honest with you. If I had to guess, that deer was bedded on this point, and he was funneling down, following this SMZ down into the hardwoods where there was a lot of fresh feeding sign, a lot of fresh tracks, and the fresh rubs. So I figured I was in this buck's core area. I actually looked over to Aaron after we finished scouting it, and I was like, dude, we got to get out of here. I'm going to hunt here this afternoon. We got to get out of here. I feel pretty confident that there's probably a buck bedded right here. And that buck, I didn't know what the buck was. He could have been, a spike. He could have been an 8-point. He could have been a huge deer. There's no telling what he was. But for a deer to be that aggressive on a tree, on a rub line, that early in the season, I knew that he had to be, at least worth throwing a hunt there. Another interesting part about this area was it was right in between two of the two spots. So on a hunting club, they number each stand, they number their fields and all that stuff. And it's usually food plots. Sometimes you'll have a feeder in the hardwoods or something like that. But this one was actually in between two different green fields and shooting houses that were set up. Now, I was expecting to find a lot of sign in those green fields. It's a destination food source. They're going to be hitting a lot of those at nighttime, especially before, when it's not even close to the rut. I mean, at this point, we're 3 months away just about from the rut in this area. So I wasn't expecting to find anything that made me think I really need to hunt this green field. But I went with the intention of going to a spot that might be overlooked by another member of this club. Because I know how hunting clubs work. Most people aren't going into areas that aren't a green field, that don't have some type of food source in there. So I figured this spot probably hadn't seen just a ton of pressure. And I mean, we were literally right in between these two green fields that were probably somewhere around 700 yards apart, if I had to guess. But if I could find a spot like I found, a core area really close, and I could get really close to this deer where he was bedded at, then I knew I could probably get a shot. And that's the kind of sign that I'm looking for when it comes to early season, trying to kill a buck in the early season in the South. That can be a hard thing, but one of the things that I really try to look for is that core area. So fast forward a little bit into this hunt. I see a doe about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This doe pops out, and she does just about what I expected a buck to do. She came right out of that clear cut, straight into those hardwoods, started feeding on acorns. Now, obviously the doe's not the one making those rubs. So I set a little bit longer. She kind of ended up feeding off, going further into the woods, kind of back behind me. I started really counting it as a bust. But then right before dark, something caught my attention. I heard it. It sounded like something just barreling through the woods. I look up really quick and I see this buck. I mean, he came running out of those pines, out of the clear cut, and started working his way right down that rub line. He never made a rub or anything like that, but he started just feeding his way right down that rub line. And long story short, he fed his way right to me. I put a bad shot on him. It was almost a good shot, but it was just a little far forward, hit him in the shoulder. We ended up recovering him the next day after getting some dogs on him and stuff, and we're able to find that deer. But this is really, it's like a true testament to me on a couple things, really. Evening hunting in the early season. I don't kill a lot of bucks in the evening. I mean, I can count on one hand how many bucks I've killed in Alabama in the evening. It just doesn't happen a lot. But if you can find these type of areas, it's a food source. You see on a lot of the Midwest hunting that they do. They're hunting soybeans in Kentucky. When I do the early season hunt in Kentucky and in Tennessee, evening times are great because you've got things like soybeans, corn, crops. You're not really hunting a lot of these big woods or agless property. And I think that's why mornings for me tend to be really good, because I can get really in close to a buck's bed and catch him coming back to his bed. But in the evenings, you have to find these hot food sources. And this one just happened to, it was really mapped out pretty perfectly for me because I was able to read that sign. I was able to get into his core area. I was able to read the sign, and it brought him basically right into my lap. If anyone finds themselves in a position where you're struggling to kill deer early season, this is one of those things that can really be beneficial, is scouting, in-season scouting, and trying to find those core areas. And they're really easy to label, because if you find big buck sign and you're really far away from the rut, that means you probably found a core area for a buck, and it may be worth throwing a sit at it. So hopefully you guys like this video. Hopefully I was able to break this down just a little bit better than you were able to see in the video. And yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited about 2021 season. It's going to be a good one. So you guys, make sure you hit subscribe. And if you haven't checked out all the other videos, check those out. Get fired up about deer season watching those. And hopefully we'll be back soon with another, big buck breakdown, or that's kind of cliche, but a video like this. Talk to you next time.